John Gregory Bishop Adams was a Medal of Honor recipient from the U.S. Civil War. Enlisting as a private, he eventually rose to the rank of captain and fought in many major Civil War battles, including Antietam, Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, and Gettysburg. Born in Groveland, Massachusetts, 1841, he enlisted as a private in Major Benjamin Perley Poor's Rifle Battalion, a unit that was later folded into the 19th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment. By the time the 19th departed the state in March of 1861, Adams was already a corporal in Company A. With the 19th, he saw his first battle at Ball's Bluff, then onto the Peninsula Campaign, where he saw action at the Battle of Fair Oaks, Glendale and Malvern Hill, the battles of Fairfax Courthouse, Flint Hill, all the way to the Battle of Antietam. By the end of the 7 days fighting on the peninsula, his bravery and gallantry had earned him a second lieutenant's commission. Now serving in Company I, it was the aftermath of the Battle of Antietam which he experienced what he called the saddest day of his life, finding his mortally wounded brother lying in the field of battle. He had been shot in the right side of the neck with the ball passing out the left shoulder. It had cut the spinal nerve, and he could not move hand or foot. He saw at once that he could not live, and had him moved to a field hospital. They had left home together, and had often talked of a happy reunion around the old fireside. When the war finally ended, Adams now realized that he must write to his old mother that one of the three who had bade her goodbye in '61 would never return. This was war, he wrote. Terrible war. As he kneeled by his brother's side, hearing his last words, a woman's voice came from behind. "Is this your brother?" she asked. He explained to her the fact that he was in command of his company and could not stay with his dying brother, but yet he could not bear to have him die alone. With tears streaming down her motherly face, this woman promised that she would not leave him, and would see that he was buried, and eventually send word to Adams where he would be laid to rest. This promise was faithfully kept. It was at the Battle of Fredericksburg where his actions would earn him the Medal of Honor. On the morning of December 11th, him and his men were ordered to the banks of the Rappahannock River. Here they would find a pontoon bridge partially laid. The engineers were doing their best to complete it, as the artillery batteries on the hills vigorously shelled the city. But rebel sharpshooters posted in cellars and rifle pits on the other side of the river would pick off the engineers as fast as they showed themselves at work. After several fruitless attempts to complete the pontoon bridge, under fire from Barksdale's Mississippi Brigade, they took pontoon boats from the wagons and carried them to the river. As soon as they touched the water, they filled them with men and attempted a crossing. 2 or 3 boats started across at the same time, as the sharpshooters on the Confederate side pelted them with terrible fire. Yet the Union troops pressed on, and at last landed on the other side. As soon as the boats touched the shore, they formed companies, and without waiting for regimental formation, charged into the streets. With fire coming from the houses on all sides, the Union troops found themselves engaged in heavy street fighting, but eventually cleared all Confederate forces from the city of Fredericksburg. And on the morning of the 13th, Adams' unit received orders to advance and marched up the street towards Marye's Heights. Shot and shell plowed through their ranks as they filed into a field and were ordered to storm the Confederate position on the heights. They had to move up an embankment, then charge over an open field, as a Confederate battery on their right fired upon them. Forward! The two color bearers, Sergeant Creasy and Sergeant Rappel, were the first to fall, but the colors did not touch the ground before they were up and going forward again. Captain Weymouth fell, shot in the leg. Captain Mahoney took command of the regiment, but he also fell. Then the color bearers went down again. Lieutenant Newcomb grasped Old Glory and handed it to Adams as he fell. At the same time, the bearer of the state colors at his side was shot, and the flag he held was grasped by Sergeant Merrill, who was soon wounded as well. Directed by a sudden instinct, Adams took possession of the state emblem as well, realizing that it would be sure death and probably the loss of both colors if they remained where they were. With a flag now in each hand, he charged across the field of battle to a fence on the left. His men followed and the regiment was reformed on his position. It was with this courageous act, double-fisting both Old Glory and his state flag, that he was able to lead the men out of the line of fire, where they could lay down, and had the opportunity to respond effectively to the rebel sharpshooters. And for those actions, he was awarded our country's highest honor, the Medal of Honor. All Medal of Honor recipients I have listened to are very modest. They always say that what they did was nothing special, and that the medal they wear is really only worn for the men they were with, especially the ones who didn't come home, saying that their actions were no more brave than the actions of those around them. And John Gregory Bishop Adams is no exception to that. In his book, he writes, "I do not mention this fact to show that I was braver than other men, for every man of the old regiment on the field would have done the same had opportunity offered. But my services were recognized by promotion to first lieutenant, and I was afterwards given a Medal of Honor by Congress for the act." Looking back, they saw that the ground was covered with their dead and wounded. The battle was lost, and under the cover of darkness, late in the evening, they collected their wounded and retreated through the city. But Adams' war was not yet over. He was eventually promoted to captain, commanding Company I, at Chancellorsville and Gettysburg, where he was severely wounded during the battle at Cemetery Hill, with one shot in the groin and another passing clean through his right hip. Upon arrival at a field hospital, a surgeon initially declared these to be mortal wounds, saying that he only had another 24 hours to live at best. Eventually, artillery shells began landing near this field hospital, and all of the non-combatants began to run. Adams laid there, begging people that passed by to get him out of there, fearing he'd either be hit by artillery or trampled by runaway horses. A group of men did eventually stop to carry him away from the chaos. It's tough to say exactly when this took place, but judging by the timing in his book, it's very likely that this artillery barrage was the opening of Pickett's charge, which men returning from the field of battle victorious told him about at the next field hospital. When they began taking the wounded to the train station, he was told that he was not to be taken with them, as he had to remain where he was for at least 2 weeks. This news upset him very much, and he admits that he buried his face and cried. He did not blame the doctors for their neglect, however, because he knew how busy they were with so many wounded following the battle. And he had other wounded to keep him company instead. He makes note of one boy who was lying next to him that suffered much but did not complain. One night, before bed, this young boy whispered to him, "Good night, Lieutenant. I think that I shall go up before morning." Adams told the boy to be brave, but it was no use. Come the morning, the boy had answered the final roll call. In his book, Adams expresses regret that he had forgotten the boy's name, and no one else seemed to know who he was either. He has no doubt that this young man's grave lays unmarked. After rotting away in this field hospital for 6 days, he convinced some of his men to carry him out of that field hospital into Littletown, where a temporary hospital was being set up in a church. Upon his arrival to this church, it was revealed that his wounds were in terrible condition. They had not been dressed and had maggots crawling in them. They were not equipped to deal with his wounds at this place either, but they did accept his request to have the prettiest girl in the room feed him while he rested his head on her shoulder, to which he writes in his book, "Oh, it was nice." He had developed a fever and his wounds began to inflame. He survived a rough train ride to Baltimore, where he was finally admitted to a real hospital and received full hospital care. His wounds were cleaned and dressed for the first time, as maggots, pieces of clothing, and bone came out. The ball that had entered his groin had struck the bone and shot downward into his leg. It was never to be removed and stayed there for the rest of his life. He remained at this hospital for a while, even sneaking out one night with a buddy to collect his paycheck against the doctor's orders. But he was eventually given leave to recover at home. And recover he did, returning to the war just in time to fight in the Wilderness Campaign, fighting at Todd's Tavern and Laurel Hill. Then the Battle of Spotsylvania and the engagement at the Bloody Angle. But his war finally came to an end with the Battle of Cold Harbor, when he was captured by Confederate forces. He spent the rest of the U.S. Civil War in Confederate prisons, first at Libby Prison in Richmond, then moved to Macon, Georgia, and Charleston, South Carolina. Finally, he was moved to a rebel prison in Columbia, where he and a fellow prisoner actually escaped, but were later captured and sent back. He was held for a total of 9 months until the war's end, where prisoners were exchanged and he returned to the North. In Adams' post-war life, he was a foreman for 10 years at the B.F. Doak & Company shoe factory in Lynn, Massachusetts. He left that post to become an inspector at the Boston Custom House, and later served as the postmaster of Lynn and deputy warden of the state reformatory at Concord. He served as an elector for the state in the 1868 presidential election, and in 1885 he was elected Sergeant-at-Arms for the Massachusetts legislature, overseeing a staff of approximately 40 and earning a salary of $3,000, which was a decent amount back then. He was a Freemason and a member of the Grand Army of the Republic, which was basically an American Legion for Union Civil War veterans, and he played a very large role in this organization as the first member of his local post, going on to serve as a delegate for the National GAR Convention 12 times, serving as department commander before being elected as commander-in-chief in 1893, president of the Association of the Survivors of Rebel Prisons, also a member of the Military Order of the Loyal Legion of the United States. So after his military career, he was still very active in his community and his service to his fellow veterans. In 1899, he published a memoir of his war service, Reminiscence of the 19th Massachusetts Regiment, which I used for a lot of the information you've heard in this video. There will be a link in the description, as the book is free online, and I can only recommend that if this stuff interests you, it is worth the read. And so far, probably my favorite first-hand account of the United States Civil War so far. I could have sat here and read the entire book to you, but people just do not have the attention span for that these days, so I tried to keep these videos short and sweet. He passed away on October 19th, 1900, and is buried in Pine Grove Cemetery, Groveland, Massachusetts.